you. It doesn't matter how good your enterprise Wi-Fi security is, it's not enough. Your Wi-Fi is still vulnerable to hijacking through Wi-Fi Pineapples in man-in-the-middle and evil twin attacks, to eavesdropping through Wi-Fi cameras or printers, and to close quarters attacks through Wi-Fi hotspots and human interface devices. We've found a Wi-Fi access point, or AP, hidden in a bag, which was turned off remotely when we approached. So they were watching us and they actually switched it off. We've found an unknown AP in a secure data centre. And we've found a device hidden under the floor. And this is just the tip of the iceberg. It doesn't matter how good your enterprise Wi-Fi security is, it is not enough. And I'll explain why during this presentation. I'm Tracie Thompson, I'm the CEO of HackHunter. And Mike, the co-founder and CTO of HackHunter, is here as well to answer questions if you decide to get technical. We've spent years researching solutions to this Wi-Fi security problem, and I want to share what we've found with you to hopefully get you thinking about the security of your Wi-Fi environment in a different way. Why have we spent so much time looking at Wi-Fi security? Because there are serious gaps that no one else is addressing. Before HackHunter, we had a security consulting and software company, and when we were doing vulnerability assessments, it was really clear to us that most organisations don't really know what unauthorised Wi-Fi is in their environment. And if they do know, there's no easy way for them to find the source so they can investigate it to see if it should be there. And then Mike was checking out a chat and he saw a post where an information security professional was sure that his neighbour was interfering with his Wi-Fi, but he had no way of finding the source to prove it. So these two things came together and we've been working on the problem ever since. First, I'm going to speak about how Wi-Fi is typically implemented in an organisation. And then I'm going to talk about the shortcomings of this approach. And then we're going to talk about a different way of thinking about your Wi-Fi security. And along the way, I'll be talking about examples and things that we've found in our research. So let's talk about enterprise Wi-Fi security. Enterprise Wi-Fi security is typically implemented using WPA2 Enterprise or 8021X to provide additional authentication and individual encryption for each session. And WPA3 is now available. WPA3 mandates additional measures like validating the authentication server and increasing the strength of the encryption. It's actually a very minor change to WPA2 Enterprise because you can already select some of these options in WPA2 Enterprise. WPA3 Enterprise just makes them mandatory. Oh, sorry, I'm going to... Okay. There are limited attacks available on corporate networks as long as they're configured correctly. WPA3 solves a lot of issues, but there are still plenty of WPA2 networks out there, and they're vulnerable to attacks like a PEAP evil twin attack, where a fake certificate is sent to the user for validation. And you can fix this problem by configuring the corporate network client to not accept invalid certificates. So we've always had reasonable security for enterprise, as long as it's correctly configured. The new standards just tweak what's come before to improve it slightly. Enterprise security is focused on Wi-Fi access points or routers. And I've had people say that their access points or APs take care of their Wi-Fi security for them. If only that were the case. High-end APs like Cisco Meraki or HP Aruba are great at telling you if there's something there that shouldn't be there. So it's not on your safe list. Unauthorised Wi-Fi. But that's about it. They're routers first, security second. For example, some research we did found the router could only pick up a broadcast deauth attack, not attacks on individual devices. When all the security features are turned on, router performance drops dramatically. In some cases, we've heard it decreases down to less than 10%. In one case we know of, the network area has told the security area they're not allowed to use security features because it basically stops the routers from working. Information about unauthorised Wi-Fi typically appears in the log and it's investigated after the fact. So this is what happened yesterday or what happened 2 hours ago. And that's really helpful for reporting, but the event's already passed. And APs can't tell you anything about unauthorised Wi-Fi. Is it malicious? What kind of device is it? What is connected to it? Is there more than one device? Most importantly, where is it? 3 or more routers can use triangulation to approximate the location of the unauthorised Wi-Fi. They can tell you it's somewhere within a 5-metre sphere, assuming that the placement of the routers is optimal. In one case we know of, it took a finance company half a day to find the Wi-Fi source via visual inspection. So their routers told them there was something there that shouldn't be there, and they had to go out and look for it. And luckily for them, it was in the open, so they found it reasonably quickly. Because in one case we've heard of, it took days to disassemble a room to find a hidden device. Enterprise security is implemented inside the enterprise perimeter, in the offices, the branches, the manufacturing and operational facilities. And this made sense because this is where Wi-Fi is used, right? But times have changed and we have a mobile workforce. Staff use their phones and their laptops at work, in the coffee shop, on the train, and working from home. And COVID has just exacerbated this. We now have organisations moving to hybrid models where people are working in the office and they're also working from home. So the traditional perimeter no longer covers everywhere that Wi-Fi is used. Yet enterprise-level Wi-Fi security is typically still only implemented within the traditional perimeter. And this is creating new vulnerabilities within organisations that in many cases are not being addressed. Protecting your staff when they're working from home kills 2 birds with 1 stone. It protects your corporate network and it also increases their personal protection. For example, we were involved in investigating a case of domestic abuse using high-tech hacking methods to exploit weaknesses in a home IT environment. It was horrific. The client's sister had separated from her husband and moved back to the family home. And he was hacking the home Wi-Fi, their mobile phones, and the children's iPads. And this affected everyone in the home, including the client who was working from home. So it traumatised them all so badly that they ended up moving interstate. And personally, if I wanted to find an exec's credentials, I wouldn't try to hack the corporate Wi-Fi network. I'd go and sit in their favourite cafe or outside their home, and I'd hijack the Wi-Fi when their phone tried to automatically reconnect to their stored Wi-Fi network. And I'll talk about this a bit more in a minute. So when we talk about your Wi-Fi not being secure, we're not talking about WPA2 or WPA3 Enterprise. They're providing reasonable security on your enterprise APs if they're properly configured within the traditional corporate perimeter. But it's not just the APs, it's the devices, it's your staff, and it's the physical environment which are the weakness. We're talking about devices like mobile phones, tablets and laptops, which are used by staff in the office, working from home, wherever they are. And IoT devices like Chromecast or Apple TV, smart fridges, TVs, vacuums, barbecues, microwaves, temperature and light sensors, security cameras, so many. These devices are everywhere. Many of them use Wi-Fi to communicate with the internet, and they are vulnerable. The most obvious vulnerability is the man in the middle or the person in the middle or evil twin attack that I spoke about before. These all work in a similar way by hijacking the device. An authorised Wi-Fi network is mimicked by the attacker and the device automatically connects to it without anyone knowing. It doesn't have to be the corporate network they mimic, and it doesn't have to be a network nearby. IoT devices like phones and laptops are constantly searching for all the Wi-Fi networks they've used and stored, so they can automatically connect when they're in range. They're sending out probe requests every couple of seconds in some cases, looking for all the networks that have nothing to do with the enterprise Wi-Fi network. All the hijacker has to do is spin up an AP with the same credentials, boost the signal strength, and any unconnected devices will automatically connect to the evil twin without the user knowing. And there are a couple of ways they can work out which network to mimic. They can just take an educated guess. At some stage, someone in range will have used Starbucks or McDonald's or Sydney Airport or Canberra free Wi-Fi. Or they can get fancy and they can use a Wi-Fi Pineapple to see exactly what networks the devices are probing for. And if the devices are already connected to a network, they can kick them off using a deauthentication or deauth attack with a device you can buy off the net for around $10. Once they've hijacked the device, they can create a fake website to harvest the credentials. For example, in one case we know of, a network support person took a support call in the local cafe. And later that day, the organisation's AWS account was accessed and multiple servers were spun up for crypto mining. This cost them thousands of dollars. In another example, a man was jailed in Victoria for insider trading. He sat in his car outside the offices of a stockbroker and he used AirCrack, which is a suite of Wi-Fi sniffing, analysis and cracking tools to harvest credentials. Then he logged into their corporate network using the stolen credentials, read their stock buy newsletters before they were published and bought the stocks and then sold them for a profit. And in another case, a Defence Overseas base had an issue with evil twins hijacking Wi-Fi, and experts had to be flown in from Australia to investigate the issue once the damage was done. In addition to hijacking, other close quarters attacks can be used against Wi-Fi devices. Human interface devices, or HIDs, can be hidden in a USB cable or any other USB connected device, like a fan or a battery charger. They give complete control of the device to the attacker. A remote-controlled Wi-Fi HID emulates a keyboard and mouse. It can be controlled by a phone, and they can have preset payloads, such as loading malicious scripts or harvesting and changing credentials on the device. A good example is the OMG Cable, which looks and behaves just like a standard USB charging cable. And you can buy it for $120 US online. How would you know if one of your staff mistakenly picked one of these up or had it swapped out without your knowledge? I've had people ask, why do we need to worry about eavesdropping, even an open network or using a commonly known shared password, now that all websites use HTTPS? Well, firstly, with WPA2, the encryption key is the same for all sessions. So this means if you sit and capture the Wi-Fi packets, you have unlimited time to go back and crack the password and decrypt the data. Secondly, not all traffic is HTTPS. We forget about devices like printers that may not be configured for HTTPS. In this case, every document sent to the printer can be easily captured and viewed on an open network or once the password's cracked. And shared workspaces are notorious for sharing Wi-Fi passwords. And close quarters attacks can be used against things other than devices. They can be used against organisations and their staff. Wi-Fi cameras and microphones can be used for eavesdropping. For example, a friend was horrified when she found hidden Wi-Fi cameras in the Airbnb she was staying in. South Korea has a huge problem where Wi-Fi cameras are placed in public places and people are filmed without their consent. It's called MOLCA, which means secret camera, and in the past 10 years, it's increased 600%. These hidden cameras are tiny enough to be placed in a shampoo bottle, and they're very hard to find with the naked eye. They use Wi-Fi to transmit the data and also even live stream. The BBC's produced a program about MOLCA, and I've got a video here to show you, which I hope will work.
일단 나와. 밖으로 나와서 그냥.
The voice of a victim of a new kind of sex crime sweeping South Korea. It's called MOLCA, the Korean word for secret camera. Spy cameras are being used to film people secretly in bedrooms, toilets, and public spaces across the country. You would become totally paranoid. You would think everything is filming you. It's even hit the glamorous world of K-pop.
집단 성폭행과 성관계 동영상 불법 촬영 유포 혐의 등으로 재판에 넘겨진 가수 정준영.
In 2019, superstar Jung Jun-young was sent to prison for secretly filming sex with fans and sharing the footage. In a few short years, Mulca has become a threatening phenomenon. Teams of specialists are now being deployed to find hidden cameras across the country, in public buildings and Mulca hotspots. Hello! Sun Hae-young is South Korea's best-known spy cam hunter. You are the first spy camera hunter I've ever met.
그 모든 곳에 이제 우리가 이제 불법 카메라가 있는지 그걸 오늘 조사를 하고 만약 있으면 제거도 하고.
Today, they're doing a sweep of a government conference centre. This is all incredibly impressive, very sophisticated.
기타 이제 기술이 발전하다 보니까 이제 와이파이나 무선 이런 식으로 이제 다양한 이제 위변조가 되고 카메라 자체가 그리고 바늘구멍처럼 그 1mm 정도의 작은 구멍만 있으면은 네, 그런 게 이제 가장 이제 무서운 거고. 샤워기 헤드에 방수로 된 카메라를 한번 접근한 적이 있고요. 그래서 이제 요즘에는 이제 그 불법 촬영 카메라가 뭐 기술이 좋으니까 방수도 가능하다는 부분이거든요. 하재 감지기나 셋탑박스 이런 뒤쪽으로 이제 보통 카메라를 많이 숨겨둡니다. 그런 부분들 집중해서 많이 보고 간혹 이제 소파 밑에도 이제 사람들이 잘 손 닿지 않는 곳, 그러니까 청소를 많이 하지 않는 장소 그런 부분을 집중해서 검사를 하고 있습니다.
If you're searching for a Wi-Fi connection, that would suggest that often they're live streaming, so they're watching what's going on in real time.
네, 맞습니다.
That feels so sinister, doesn't it? The idea of that happening really freaks me out. People aren't just recording Mulca for their personal use. Mulca's money-making potential means that cameras are being hidden more often in Korea's love motels. What a treat for me. Motels like these rent rooms by the hour.
카메라를 한 30개 정도 설치를 해놨는데 직접 찾아보세요.
Okay, about 30. Bloody hell. All right, the interior in here is so strange. If I was here just as a customer, nothing is immediately obvious. Some here.
어디에 가면 네, 맞아요.
As if you would ever suspect that in a million years.
이 액자의 카메라 위치를 알려주셔야 그게 정답이 되는 거예요.
On the barcode.
아직 한 30개 정도 남아있어요.
This is really a clock. Can you imagine going through this every time you want sex? And you're paying by the hour. Anyone can buy cameras online.
거기에 카메라가 한 개 더 있어요. 총 2개가 있어요.
Jeez, in the hangar. There. Wow, that is mad. I'm now thinking of all the hotels I've stayed in and what I've done in the rooms. Some cameras cost as little as £25 in there.
네, 맞습니다.
I've only found half. One in the aircon.
오.
I'm a genius. I give up. I don't know where the others are. You'll have to show me.
카메라가 숨기죠.
Most of the cameras that Sun Hae-young finds are hidden in motel rooms. Oh, I checked the clock. So everything you see on this bed has the potential to film you surreptitiously. So you have absolutely no idea. And for me, like the even scarier thing is that some of them, like live stream, I find it utterly mind-blowing. I really do. Like, I'm really shocked. Tell me what...
Okay, so eavesdropping Wi-Fi cameras are obviously a huge concern, both to your staff on a personal level, but also to the organisation, because they can be used to record anything from keystrokes to conversations. And Wi-Fi hotspots can be used to exfiltrate data. by transferring data from a LAN-connected device through a hotspot, local network controls can be circumvented. For example, they can upload data to a restricted Dropbox account. A good example of this is some research that we did with an ASX 50 finance company. They have a no hotspot policy and they do a quarterly audit for PCI DSS compliance. For those of you who don't know, PCI DSS is the Payment Card Industry Data Security Standard, and it applies to any organisation that stores or processes card data, debit or credit, which is pretty much every organisation these days. The Wi-Fi guidelines require a quarterly audit where unauthorised Wi-Fi is detected, located and removed. So we did a floor walk or a Wi-Fi audit with them where they looked at a selection of the unauthorised Wi-Fi on each floor and investigated whether it should be there or not. And there was a lot of unauthorised Wi-Fi. We looked at around 6 Wi-Fi sources on each floor, and the vast majority of them were staff who were hotspotting. So in most cases, this will just be someone who's forgotten to turn their hotspot off once they've got to work. But in some cases, it could be malicious data exfiltration. The question is, how do you know? You have to find the source and investigate. And we found one very suspicious case where the staff member had his phone hotspot connected to a laptop which was also connected to the corporate network. So we referred this to security. So all the attacks I've just spoken about, the human interface devices, the Wi-Fi cameras, Wi-Fi hotspotting, they all use Wi-Fi, but they have absolutely nothing to do with the enterprise Wi-Fi network. There are lots of devices that you can buy off the internet for a few dollars or build them yourself, which can be used for these attacks. And here are some we prepared earlier. So this is a remote-controlled, battery-operated de-auth and beacon flooding device, which we built ourselves based on open-source software. It's used to disconnect devices from a Wi-Fi network and stop them from reconnecting. It also generates fake APs, so you don't know which one to log back onto. It can disable a Wi-Fi network indefinitely. Total cost, $5. You can build these into anything, like a watch and, as you can see, a tennis ball. Now, there are protections against de-auth attacks, but even Telstra's latest router was only patched for this in July last year. Many organisations have old routers or they're not up to date with their patching. Next we have a WiFi Pineapple, which you can buy online from Hack5 for $100 US. And this is used for many attacks, mainly man-in-the-middle or evil twin attacks. And it can automatically detect stored networks on a target device and spin up a fake AP within seconds. And even WPA3 won't protect against that. And this is our version of an OMG cable. We've built it in a USB key format instead of the cable, and it can be remotely controlled to deliver a payload to the target device. And you can see how small that is. And finally, this is a Ponygochi, which may look very cute, but it will automatically attack networks and capture password hashes ready for cracking. So if you want to have a closer look and have a play with the tools, come and see us after the presentation. In our research, we've found most people are worried about one thing when it comes to their Wi-Fi: network visibility. They want to know exactly what's in their Wi-Fi network right now. We've spoken to ASX 50 finance companies, multinationals, government departments, US defence primes. They're all worried about the same thing. What is in my Wi-Fi environment? And the reason they need to know varies. It could be because it's part of their governance requirements. Maybe they need to comply with PCI DSS or CMMC, the Cybersecurity Maturity Model certification required by US Department of Defence. Or maybe they operate secure sites and they need to know about anything that's not meant to be there. Or maybe it's just an unacceptable risk to them that they don't know what is in their Wi-Fi environment. In the research we did with the finance company, we did a quarterly Wi-Fi audit with them for their PCI DSS compliance. And as I said before, we found lots of APs, which were mostly staff hotspotting on their phones. But we also found 2 unauthorised Wi-Fi devices, which were potentially malicious. One was found under the floor. No one had any idea what it was or how long it had been there. The second device was even more concerning. The AP signal was coming from a bag sitting on a row of empty desks. The bag had multiple pockets, and as we were trying to work out which pocket it was in, the signal stopped. So they were watching us and they turned it off remotely. The company had no idea that these two potentially malicious, unauthorised Wi-Fi were in their environment. We also did some research with the Defence Prime in the US, which operates secure sites. They have a no hotspot policy, and the only Wi-Fi sources should be their own APs. But during a Wi-Fi audit, they were very surprised to find unauthorised Wi-Fi in the secure data centre. It wasn't on their safe list, and their high-end routers didn't detect it at all. So when they investigated, they found that there was an AP in the data centre they were using to perform a specific function, but they just hadn't bothered to tell the security or the network guys. So how can you secure an area if you don't know what's there? You need to know what normal looks like to your organisation, what APs or stations or devices or clients are meant to be there for business as usual. And then you need to see how that changes over time, from audit to audit, which could be weekly, could be monthly. We suggest it should be 24/7. You need to develop a baseline, which includes a safe list showing your own devices, which should be there, and an ignore list that shows you Wi-Fi that's safe to ignore. For example, the accountant's on the same floor. So to do this, you need to physically investigate and validate the Wi-Fi signature against your safe and ignore lists for every Wi-Fi source in your environment. For example, if you're checking into a hotel, don't just accept that the Wi-Fi belongs to the hotel. You should validate it by checking the Wi-Fi router when you check in. Once you have a validated safe and ignore list, you can then see what's changed over time and investigate appropriately. And this will save you time and definitely improve your security posture. So I'm running out of time here. I was just going to recap what we've spoken about. But I will move on instead to what you can do about it. So what you can do is to configure your Wi-Fi security correctly. For example, patching, upgrade to WPA3. Use purpose-built security monitoring and tracking tools. Now, we've got a Wi-Fi security checklist that you're welcome to use, and if you're interested in that, come and see us after the presentation and we'll arrange it for you. Be aware of the Wi-Fi that's used by your staff when they're outside the corporate perimeter and factor this into your risk management process. And develop a safe and ignore list to provide a baseline for what's normal in your organisation. Regularly audit and then compare that to the baseline to see what's changed and what needs investigation. Thanks for listening, and now we'll have some questions.
So if you could just raise your hand when you're asking your question, state who you are and where you're from. And thank you.
Thanks. Any questions? Yes.
Using VPN for Wi-Fi.
Yeah, recommended, but you have to be aware of some of the shortcomings of the VPN. So there are plenty of places in the world, unfortunately, where VPNs aren't permitted. So some of the airports, for example, you might get stuck there. The second part is VPNs have to establish an internet connection to be able to create the endpoint dialogue, if you like. So there's a period of time while you're connected to the internet before the VPN's connected that you're exposed. So your PC or your phone, for example, can send an enormous amount of data during that period before the VPN's connected. So there are plenty of apps on your phone, for example, which will automatically communicate the minute they have an internet connection. So that's something to keep in mind. The third one is you have to trust the VPN itself, right? So VPN itself is a potential weakness. So if you have a trusted VPN or the corporations running their own VPNs, that's a good option. But certainly, be aware that there are vulnerabilities in VPNs themselves. And of course, VPN itself is not a catch-all defence against some of these other attacks.
Yes.
You mentioned that some of the high-end routers can do some detection of rogue access points.
Yep.
How do they do that? And are there open source tools and technologies that can do the same thing?
Yeah.
Okay, so the question is high-end routers, how they can detect Wi-Fi and if there's any open source tools that use to do the same.
Yes, certainly there are. There is in fact, if you play with Kali Linux, if you're playing with, Aircrack Suite, you're looking at Kismet, there's a whole lot of tools that are actually quite useful at doing packet analysis. Unfortunately, a lot of these tend to be focused on PCAP analysis or after the event. But in terms of, real-time analysis, what the routers typically do is work off a very simple safe list. So it's just a very simple comparison. If I've got the same SSID popping up and it's a different BSSID, that's something I need to look at. Of course, some corporations actually do that legitimately, have multiple same SSID but different BSSIDs. So it depends on the configuration of the network. Unfortunately, the depth of these tools is very, very shallow. And there's two reasons for this. So one, as Tracie alluded to, is if you turn on the security features, you're actually diminishing performance because they tend to use the same chip to do the routing as well. So they tend to do sort of surface level analysis. But there are I'll give you an example of some of the things we look at, for example. So some of the things we look at are things like padded spaces at the end of an SSID. And the reason we do that is a lot of the tools actually do pad the 32-byte field with spaces, so that's often a giveaway. But keep in mind, if you're in a busy environment, you'd be surprised how many people actually misspell their APs and actually put spaces at the end of it. So you'll end up with a lot of false positives. So you have to have other mechanisms to look at that. And this is why it gets complex. There's not sort of one solve-all tool. You probably heard a talk at perhaps B-sides, for example. There was a guy did a talk on a Y-bear, I think it was, and they were looking at signature patterns for APs that could show that it's been spun up by Airbase, for example. And there are patterns and things, consistent patterns that we've also been searching as well consistent with that. But that's almost like a virus mechanism. You have to look at that very carefully. And also the attackers can craft their own payloads and get around some of that. So that's a bit of a cat and mouse game as well. So the short answer is, the really only most reliable way to do it is you have to actually identify it and go out and physically check. And that's really the only way that you can be sure. And good attackers are very, very good at mimicking known networks, and they actually will vary their signal strength, for example, as well to mimic that. So you can even look at RSSI variance as a tool. And for example, if your static AP has a nice little line of about minus 75 dBi, and then all of a sudden it's going up and down, your AP shouldn't be moving. So there are other tools ways you can actually trigger and look at this stuff as well. But those sort of levels of sophistication typically don't exist in routers. Sure.
Peter from ICT Prism. How do you find those hidden cameras when, for example, they're more sophisticated and they record into SD cards?
Yes.
Connect to Wi-Fi every now and then?
Yes, so how do you find hidden cameras which are not transmitting Wi-Fi continuously?
Yeah, and it's a good question because the short answer is not every camera will actually transmit at all. They'll just store locally. So you have to rely on physical detection measures. You can do sort of EMF patterns, so you can look for low threshold electronic signatures, simply electromagnetic radiation coming off a device because it's actually being powered. If you saw some of the devices in that film, you'll see they were using special cameras that were actually pushing a certain frequency of light and trying to get lens reflection back. So they're actually looking at the lens reflection there to try and find the camera. So they're the kind of the two most obvious ways to do it, but physical inspection is often needed to do that. The reason why Wi-Fi, we focus on the Wi-Fi side, but certainly you can't catch every camera just looking at that. But a lot of the big threats are cameras that are actually transmitting. And sometimes they won't even transmit direct. They'll actually, you can even use Bluetooth, for example, to hack a phone, and then use the phone's back-end hall to actually transmit the data. So there's some very tricky devices out there that were popping up at the moment.